10 disturbing true Appalachian graveyard encounters. Horror Stories Story 1: Shadows Among the Tombstones. I was 16 the first time I wandered into the old graveyard at the edge of Whitley Hollow. Folks in town had always whispered about it, said the ground was cursed, held secrets nobody ought to disturb. At first, I didn't pay it much mind. I was just a kid, curious and restless, and the edges of that hollow seemed like the kind of place a boy might dare himself into. That evening, the sun had slipped just below the ridge, leaving everything around me stretched and thin in shadow. The gravestones leaned at odd angles, some cracked, some barely rising above the overgrown grass, and I remember thinking how strange it was that so many markers seemed forgotten, swallowed up by the forest creeping in from every side. As I stepped between them, a cold, wet fog began to curl around my ankles. It wasn't like any fog I'd known before. It felt slow, deliberate, almost alive. And with each step it seemed to thicken, like the earth itself was breathing down on me. I tried to shake off the unease, told myself I was imagining things. But then I noticed them, figures lingering at the edges of my vision. I couldn't see them clearly. They were always just beyond the corner of my eye, moving slow and patient, and every time I turned to look directly, they vanished, like smoke drawn back into the trees. My chest tightened as I continued walking, each step heavier than the last, like the weight of something unseen pressing down on my shoulders. The air felt thick and charged, humming in a way that made my skin crawl. I tried to call out just to hear my own voice, but when I did, it sounded hollow. Swallowed by the trees and the fog, the whispers of the forest, the wind rustling leaves, twigs snapping under my boots, felt amplified, almost deliberate, like someone, or something, was pacing me from the shadows. And then I heard it, a faint, trembling whisper, soft and shivering, coming from the ground itself. It sounded like a child calling for help, but the voice was fractured, like it had been buried beneath the soil for decades. I froze, trying to convince myself it was the wind or the echo of some old story passed down through town, but my gut twisted into a hard knot. Panic began to coil in my chest, but my legs refused to move at first. Then the whisper came again, closer this time, curling up around my feet, rising in urgency, but still impossibly hollow. I spun around, eyes darting across the fogged rows of stone, but there was nothing there, just the leaning graves and the creeping mist. My heart thudded painfully, and I bolted, stumbling over uneven ground, my boots catching on roots and rocks, the whisper trailing behind me like a shadow I couldn't escape. Each breath I took felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Each glance over my shoulder was met with nothing, but I just knew something had been following. By the time I broke through the line of trees and saw the dim outline of my house, I was shaking so badly I could barely unlock the door. I slammed it behind me, pressed my back to the frame, listening. For a long moment, everything was still. I told myself it was over, that I had imagined it all, that the graveyard was just a quiet, lonely place, full of old stones and shadows. But even as I lay in my bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, had followed me home. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind against the windows made my skin prickle with awareness, like eyes were watching me from just beyond the edge of the light. Over the next few days, I found myself drawn back to that hollow in uneasy fascination. I didn't go in, not fully, but I'd linger at the edge, peering into the mist that clung to the graves. Each time I did, I saw them again, figures just at the corner of my vision, moving slowly, waiting. Sometimes I'd hear that same soft, trembling whisper, and even though I knew better, I felt compelled to lean closer, to try and understand it. I never could. It was always gone, leaving only the smell of damp earth and the sickening weight of unease behind. I asked folks in town about it cautiously, as if voicing the memory might make it real. They'd shake their heads, mutter warnings, and tell me that the hollow keeps its own, that some graves are meant to be left alone. I tried to put it out of my mind, tried to live normally, but even years later, the memory clings, sometimes in the quiet. I feel that fog curling around my ankles again. Sometimes I swear I hear that trembling whisper beneath the ground, calling out from the dark corners of the hollow. And every time I walk past the edge of the woods, I feel it. The weight of eyes watching, patient and cold, waiting for the next time curiosity lures someone in. I never went back to that graveyard after that first night, and part of me knows I never will. But the shadows have a way of lingering in your mind, and the hollow doesn't easily forget. The fear isn't sharp or sudden. It's quiet, patient, a pressure that never lets go. Even now I hesitate when the wind shifts, when the fog settles low, and I think about the graves in Whitley Hollow. And I remember that trembling whisper beneath the soil. I don't know what it was or why it called to me, but I do know this. Some places are not meant to be seen, some secrets are meant to sleep, and some shadows, they wait. Always. Story 2, The Lantern That Guided No One. I remember the evening clearly, though I wish I could forget it. The rain had started early, steady and cold, turning the paths in the hollow to thick mud and sending streams of water down the ridges. I had been walking home from a friend's house when the wind pushed me toward the old graveyard at the edge of the forest. I shouldn't have been there, I knew that, but something about the way the rain slicked the leaves and filled the air with the smell of wet earth drew me in. That's when I noticed it. Half buried near a broken headstone, an old lantern, its metal rusted and handle caked in grime. It looked as though no one had touched it for decades. Something told me to leave it be, to turn around and go home. But the curiosity that had always gotten the better of me took hold. And I knelt to clear the mud and moss away. Lighting it wasn't easy. The wick was soaked, and my hands shook so badly I could barely strike a match. When it finally caught, the flame was small, fragile, flickering, but it didn't illuminate the way as I expected. The light didn't push back the dark. It pulled it forward, curling shadows along the damp earth, making the gravestones lean closer as if they were straining to see me. I held the lantern higher, thinking it might show me the path out, but it only seemed to throb in my hand, a dim, pulsing glow that led me deeper into the rows of graves. The further I walked, the more the stones tilted, uneven and jagged, their inscriptions worn smooth, yet somehow I felt them watching, silently, impossibly. I thought I saw movement. Figures crouched low between the stones, shifting just enough that my eyes caught them in the corner of my vision. I froze, heart hammering, convincing myself it was only the fog and rain twisting the shadows, but every instinct screamed otherwise. I tried to step back, to leave the lantern and run, but it pulsed in my hand again, insistent, almost alive. It seemed to urge me forward, deeper into the hollowed graves. Each step was heavy, the wet earth sucking at my boots, and I could hear the faintest crunch of soil behind me, soft and deliberate, like someone, or something, walking in rhythm with my own steps. The rain had slowed, but the mist had thickened, rolling low across the stones. I could see the figures more clearly now, though not enough to tell what they were. They crouched, waiting, eyes seeming to glint faintly in the lantern's unnatural glow. I tried to drop it, to run, but my arms moved sluggishly, like they weren't entirely my own. When the flame flickered violently, my panic snapped forward, and I stumbled back, sending the lantern crashing to the ground. The light went out, swallowed by darkness, and I ran without thinking, slipping through mud and puddles, branches tearing at my jacket, lungs burning. I didn't stop until the forest thinned and the lights of the road came into view. Only then did I dare to look back toward the graveyard, but it was empty. The lantern lay there, still faintly glowing, as if nothing had happened, as if the figures had never been there. And yet, I swear I still see it in the corner of my eye sometimes, a dim, pulsing glow among the stones, and I can feel those crouched shadows lingering just beyond sight, waiting. Even now, years later, the memory sticks like mud under my fingernails. I can recall the smell of wet earth, the hiss of rain on the old stones, the way the mist seemed to coil around the lantern, carrying whispers I couldn't understand. Some nights, when the wind shifts through the trees near the edge of the hollow, I can almost hear that soft crunch of soil behind me, and my skin tightens. Even though I am safe in my own home, that lantern, the way it guided me into a place I shouldn't have been, never illuminated the path. It only showed me what was already there, waiting, patient and silent, in the shadows of forgotten graves. I never returned to that graveyard after that night. I told no one of what happened, knowing they would dismiss it or, worse, tease me for letting imagination get the better of me. And yet, I can't shake the feeling that it wasn't imagination, that the figures were real, that the lantern had some strange will of its own, beckoning me deeper into the darkness. Sometimes I lie awake, thinking of that wet fog, the leaning stones and the glow of that cursed lantern, and I wonder if someone else might find it and follow, as I did, into the silent, patient dread of that old hollow. It's not the kind of fear that grabs you and shakes you. It's quieter, slower, persistent. It lingers in the corners of your mind, in the spaces between footsteps and shadows. I can still see the figures crouched, waiting just beyond my vision. I can still feel the pull of the lantern, urging me forward into what I don't understand, into what I am not meant to see. And every time I remember that night, every time I think of Whitley Hollow, I feel the same tug at my chest, the same whispering pull of the earth, of the forgotten graves, of the dim, pulsing light that guided me nowhere and led me somewhere I can never explain. Story 3. Graveyard Voices in the Mist. It was early October, and the air had that sharp, biting edge that only comes when autumn begins to claim the hills. The fog had rolled in thick and low, settling over the old graveyard at the edge of the forest like a slow, grey tide. I'd gone there on a dare, thinking it would be empty, quiet, and maybe a little thrilling. The kind of place that promised nothing but the scrape of my boots over cracked stone and the occasional caw of a crow in the distance. I carried a lantern, its glass smudged and wick low, more out of habit than any real need for light. As soon as I stepped onto the path, though, the mist seemed to thicken, curling around my ankles, hugging the stones, swallowing the spaces between them. At first, it was just the fog, the way it moved and shifted with the wind. But then I started to hear it. Soft murmurs, almost human, almost pleading. I froze, thinking it might be some stray voices from the town or the wind blowing through hollow branches. I called out, expecting the usual laughter from friends hiding somewhere behind the trees, but there was nothing. Just the fog and the soft hiss of leaves. The murmurs grew louder, pressing closer, circling me in a way that made my skin prickle. I turned sharply, trying to find someone, anyone, but the grave stood empty. The headstones leaned crooked, some etched names worn smooth by decades of rain, others broken entirely, jagged edges jutting out of the damp earth like teeth. My lantern flickered as I moved, casting long, uneven shadows across the stones, and that's when I saw them, or at least I thought I did. Thin, twitching shapes slinking between the graves, moving just out of focus, impossible to get a clear look at. I tried to convince myself it was the fog playing tricks, that the shadows were my own imagination, but my stomach twisted with unease. Then I heard it, clear this time. A voice, low and trembling, whispering my name. It wasn't a child from town, not anyone I knew, and for a brief moment, I felt it, icy fingers brushing my shoulder, light as a feather but heavy with intent. My breath hitched, and I stumbled backward, heart hammering, nearly dropping the lantern. Panic set in, but the fog seemed to thicken, as if it knew I was afraid. Every step I took was met with resistance from the damp earth, roots and stones tripping me, slowing me down. The whispers didn't stop. They twisted around me, rising and falling in impossible rhythms, pressing closer even when I spun in a full circle. I ran blindly, trying to find the edge of the graveyard, my lantern swinging wildly, light bouncing off cold, wet stones. I tripped again, scraping my palms on rough bark and the uneven ground, and something whispered so close to my ear it made my blood run cold, almost tangible against my skin. Finally, I burst from the tree line, the fog thinning, my lungs burning, feet soaked and bleeding from unseen thorns and roots. Even then, as I reached the familiar dirt road and my porch light flickered in the distance, I could still hear them. Soft, patient voices carrying through the cool night air, following me, lingering behind each step. I reached my door and slammed it shut, pressed my back to the wood, trying to catch my breath, telling myself it was over. But the whispers didn't stop entirely. They hummed at the edges of my hearing like something refused to leave. I stayed awake that night, lantern at my side, listening to the wind twisting through the eaves, wondering if the voices were gone or just waiting for me to step outside again. The memory of those twitching shadows, the scraping ice-cold fingers, and the names whispered in the mist has never left me. Even now, I avoid that part of the forest. I pass the old graveyard by the farthest edges, quickening my step when the fog begins to roll in, my ears straining for the soft murmur of voices that might be calling me back. I don't understand what I experienced that night, and I don't think I ever will. All I know is that some corners of the hollow hold more than dead stones, and some whispers never truly fade, no matter how far you run. Story 4. The Old Caretaker's Warning. I first met the caretaker on a late summer afternoon, a quiet, hunched man who moved slowly among the gravestones, muttering about respect for the dead. His voice was low and rasping, almost swallowed by the rustle of the trees, and when he spoke to me, he warned in that soft, serious tone to never wander into the back row of the graveyard after dusk. Of course, I was 16, restless, and curious in that reckless way only teenagers are. I nodded politely, trying to hide my skepticism, but the warning stuck in my mind, like a seed planted deep in uneasy soil. I told myself it was just superstition, an old man's way of keeping children away from overgrown stones, but some small, uneasy part of me wondered why he seemed so adamant. It was early October when curiosity finally got the better of me. The air was cool and damp, and a mist had begun to settle low over the graves. I slipped past the main row of stones where the path was familiar and safe, and headed toward the back, where broken markers jutted at odd angles, and thorned vines had begun to claim the earth. The further I went, the quieter the world seemed to become. Even the wind softened, and the creak of a branch overhead felt amplified, almost deliberate. The back row wasn't just neglected, it felt abandoned by the world entirely. Each stone leaned in a way that made it seem as if they were straining to see me, to notice my intrusion. The moment I stepped into the tangled undergrowth, I felt it, a presence beside me, patient and unmoving, like someone had always been there, waiting. My chest tightened, my steps slowed, and every instinct screamed to turn and run. Shadows shifted around me unnaturally, flickering just beyond the reach of my eyes, and I began to hear it, faint footsteps echoing mine. I froze, listening hard, certain someone was walking behind me, but when I spun around, the graveyard was empty. The mist curling between leaning stones like smoke. My stomach knotted. I should have turned back then, but something rooted me to the spot. A mixture of fear and fascination that made me feel both prey and trespasser. A chill ran down my spine, crawling along my arms, and I heard it clearly this time, a voice, low and almost sorrowful, whispering, "You shouldn't be here." My legs stiffened. I could feel it, not a touch, but a weight, a pressure beside me, as though whatever had spoken had already marked me. My mind raced, trying to rationalize it, telling myself the caretaker was right, that I was in a place I shouldn't be, yet my curiosity kept me planted, eyes darting across the moss-covered stones. The back row seemed alive in some subtle way. The shadows pressed in closer with every heartbeat, the shapes of the broken stones seeming to tilt slightly, as if shifting under their own will. Panic finally broke the spell. My legs gave way, stumbling through roots and brambles, hands scraping on wet stone as I scrambled toward the familiar path that led back to the main cemetery. Behind me, I thought I felt something brush against me, something cold, deliberate, heavy with intent. I didn't dare look back. I ran harder than I'd ever run, lunging over jagged ground and through thorned vines, my lungs burning, heart hammering like a drum in my chest. Only when I crossed back into the open, familiar rows of graves did I slow, breathing ragged, shaking in every muscle. Even then, the feeling didn't leave. The weight of eyes on my back, the brush of a presence that didn't belong to the living, lingered with me. I tried to convince myself I had imagined it, that the caretaker's warning had merely made my mind play tricks, but the memory of the whisper, soft and sorrowful, and the unnatural movement of the shadows in the back row stayed with me, etched into my mind like the names on the cracked stones. For nights afterward, I could see them in my dreams, shifting just at the edge of vision, waiting, patient and unrelenting. I never returned to that part of the graveyard, and I've never told anyone else about what I felt that evening. The caretaker's warning was no superstition. It was a caution born of knowledge, of understanding that some corners of the hollow are not meant for the living. The memory of that chill, the unseen presence, and the whispered warning continues to press against me. A subtle reminder that some places keep their secrets well and claim a part of you simply for entering. Even now, when the wind twists through the trees near the old cemetery, I feel it, the weight of something waiting, always patient, and the lingering fear that curiosity has a cost you can't see until it brushes past your shoulder. Story 5. The Coffin Dug in Moonlight. It was late one October night when I first heard it, the sound of earth being scraped, muffled against the whispering wind, but distinct enough to make my blood run cold. I had been walking home through the old cemetery, following a narrow trail that cut between leaning stones, when the sound stopped me in my tracks. The moon hung low in the sky, pale and thin, casting the graves in silver and shadow, and I could see mist curling low along the ground. Something was out there, moving among the graves, and I couldn't shake the sense that it was alive, deliberate. My curiosity, the same reckless streak that had gotten me into trouble before, pulled me toward the sound. The clearing was small, tucked between two ancient oak trees, and when I stepped into it, I froze. The earth had been turned over freshly, soil damp and dark beneath the moonlight, and there, being lowered into the ground, was a coffin. I blinked, unsure if my eyes were deceiving me, but the movement was real. The slow, measured descent into the dug grave. What startled me most wasn't the coffin itself, but that there was no one visible to be lowering it. No hands, no shadow, just the creak of wood against earth and the soft settling of the soil as the coffin sank. I wanted to step back, to turn and run, but my feet felt rooted, as though the ground itself had claimed me. The mist seemed to thicken around my ankles, clinging like a living thing. My breath hitched, every instinct screaming to leave, but I couldn't move. That's when I heard it, breathing, slow and deliberate, coming from just behind me. I didn't dare turn my head. Something about the air told me it was there, watching, patient and quiet, as if it had been waiting for me to see what I wasn't meant to see. I could feel the weight of its presence pressing against my back, chilling me through my jacket and into my bones. The moonlight flickered through the trees, casting shadows that shifted unnaturally across the clearing, and the coffin's outline seemed to pulse slightly in the pale glow. I tried to convince myself that someone had dug the grave, left for a moment, and I had caught the wrong angle, the wrong glimpse. But instinct is a hard thing to ignore. I could feel eyes on me, unblinking, and the wind carried the faintest whisper of movement across the soil. My heart hammered, my legs finally obeying as I stumbled backward over roots and uneven stone. I didn't dare look back. Every step felt like it took me farther from some invisible line I had crossed, farther from whatever presence had been holding me there. When I finally broke free of the clearing, the mist thinned, and the graveyard seemed ordinary again, just a collection of stones and shadows. I glanced back once, but the coffin was gone. Only the ground remained, flattened and slick with damp earth, as if the soil itself remembered what had been buried there, even if nothing else did. I walked home with a stiff neck, ears straining for any sound that might follow me. But the night was silent except for the distant call of an owl and the steady drip of water from leaves onto stone. Sleep that night came fitfully, haunted by the image of the coffin descending into the earth and the feeling of deliberate, patient breath behind me. Morning didn't bring comfort. I returned, compelled by a mixture of dread and disbelief, and the clearing looked like any other patch of untended earth. The grave was gone, as if it had never existed. The soil was damp and loose, and I could trace the impressions of something heavy being lowered, but there was no coffin. No footprints, nothing to explain the memory of what I had seen. I told myself I must have imagined it, that the shadows, the moonlight, and my own fear had conjured the image, and yet the earth carried a trace of what had happened. I haven't returned to that part of the cemetery since. The memory lingers in the back of my mind like a half-forgotten dream that presses against reality, impossible to dismiss, even on clear nights, when the moon casts long shadows across my yard. I think about the presence I felt in the clearing, patient and deliberate, and I wonder if it's still there, watching, waiting for someone else to wander close. The silence of the cemetery, the emptiness of that clearing, carries more weight than any sound or sight could, and I can't shake the certainty that what I saw was neither alive nor dead, and yet not wholly absent either. I don't know why the coffin was lowered without hands, why the presence remained behind me as I fled, or why the grave disappeared by morning. All I know is that some places in the hollow are not meant to be disturbed. Some acts of the earth and the night exist beyond explanation. And the weight of what I witnessed stays with me, pressing at the edges of memory. I avoid that stretch of the graveyard now, my steps hurried when I pass, my gaze fixed on the familiar path, but sometimes the earth seems to call, faintly, with the same deliberate rhythm I heard that night. And when that memory stirs, I can feel the chill at the base of my neck, the slow, patient breathing behind me, and I know that the clearing has not forgotten, and perhaps it never will. Story 6. The Bell That Tolled Alone. I don't talk about that night much. It's one of those memories that sticks to you, no matter how many years go by, like the smell of damp earth after rain. I was 22, restless, and too curious for my own good. Folks in town used to whisper about the old graveyard that sat on the ridge, the one no one bothered to care for anymore. You'd see weeds up to your waist and stones so crooked they looked like teeth in a broken jaw. They said the place was quiet as the dead themselves, which was true. Except for the night I heard the bell. It was late, maybe past midnight. I had been walking home from a friend's place, cutting across the hollow like I always did. That's when I heard it. A bell tolling, soft but steady, somewhere far off, in the dark. It froze me where I stood. We didn't have a church out that way anymore. The old one had burned down before I was born, and the nearest steeple was miles from where I was. At first I thought maybe I imagined it, some trick of wind or metal swinging loose. But then it rang again, slow, hollow, like something calling for attention. Against my better judgment, I followed it. The sound carried strangely, drifting between the trees as if it couldn't decide where it wanted to be. By the time I reached the graveyard, the night was so still it hurt to breathe. My boots sank into wet grass, and the only light came from the thin sliver of moon pushing through the clouds. That's when the bell struck again, not from a tower, not from anywhere above, but right there in the graveyard, low and heavy, like it was ringing from underground. I remember standing between the stones, the sound vibrating in my chest. Nobody was there, no lanterns, no pranksters, nothing. But every time the bell rang, it seemed to come from a different spot, always near a grave. I tried to laugh it off, maybe a bird or the echo off the ridge, but deep down I knew better. The air felt too charged, too heavy. I moved closer to one stone, and the sound shifted, sharp and sudden, like it had been waiting for me to notice. The first grave it rang over was a name I recognized, Amos Tiller. My granddad used to talk about him. A farmer who'd vanished during a storm in the 40s, body never found. Folks said he drowned in the river, but they buried an empty coffin just the same. As soon as I stepped back, the bell tolled again, and the echo slid down the row, marking another stone. I followed it, my chest tightening with every step. One by one, the bell picked out names from the stones. Each one I knew, though not personally. They were names I'd read in the town records at the library where I sometimes worked. Unsolved deaths, people who'd gone missing, or families that had just faded out without explanation. The sound never touched the stones of the ordinary dead, only those with unfinished stories. The deeper I went, the stronger the pull became. The grass seemed thicker, grabbing at my boots, and the trees leaned in as though they were watching. I don't know why I kept moving. I should have turned back the second I heard that bell, but something in me had to see it through. Curiosity, maybe. Or maybe it was something else, guiding me like a hand at my back. Finally, the toll led me to a stone so weathered the name was nearly gone. I had to brush away moss just to make it out. When I did, my stomach turned to ice. It was my family name, Danner. The stone was for Joseph Danner, my great uncle. I knew the story. He'd disappeared when he was 19, just like me, heading into the woods one night and never coming home. They never found a trace. My grandmother used to warn me not to linger outside after dark, always with this sad look in her eyes. Now I understood why. The bell gave one final toll, so close it rattled my teeth. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. It pressed against me, thick and suffocating, until I could hear nothing but my own heartbeat. That was when I felt it, the faintest vibration under my boots, like something shifting beneath the earth. I don't remember running, but I must have, because the next thing I knew I was back at the edge of the hollow, gasping for air. I didn't stop until I slammed my own door shut behind me. My hands shook so bad I couldn't work the lock for a full minute. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there listening, praying the sound wouldn't follow me, but it did. Not loud, not even real maybe, just a soft ringing at the edge of my dreams. And it's been there ever since. Some nights it's stronger, like the bell is just down the hall, waiting. Other nights it's faint, a whisper of metal far away. But it never leaves. And every time it comes, I think about those graves, about the way the bell chose certain names. I wonder if it was trying to tell me something, that their stories aren't finished, that someone has to remember them. Or maybe it wasn't about them at all. Maybe it was about me. I haven't been back to that graveyard, though Lord knows I feel it pulling at me sometimes, especially when the tolling in my head grows louder. I don't tell folks much, because who'd believe me? But I can't shake the feeling that one day, when I can't resist anymore, I'll go back, and when I do, the bell will be waiting, ready to ring over one more name carved into stone. My own. Story 7, Footsteps. Behind the fallen stones, I'd always had a thing for old cemeteries, not out of morbid curiosity, but out of respect. My grandmother used to say a person dies twice, once when they're buried, and again when their name is spoken for the last time. Maybe that's why I started volunteering for a local history project. My job was simple: photograph old headstones, catalogue the inscriptions, keep a record for families and the county. I figured it was quiet work, almost peaceful. But I can tell you now, some things out there don't want to be remembered. It was late October when I drove up a mountain road to a forgotten graveyard I'd only heard of in passing. Folks in town called it the Fallen Stones. The cemetery hadn't been tended to in decades. No road signs marked the way. I followed directions scribbled on the back of a gas station receipt. By the time I got there, the sun was already dipping, bleeding orange into the ridgeline. My boots sank into soft earth as I walked through the rusted gate. The air heavy with damp leaves and the sweet rot of mushrooms. The stones leaned at angles. Names worn down by rain. Some toppled into the earth like they'd been swallowed. Moss clung to them like skin. I remember thinking I was alone. The silence was so complete it made my own footsteps sound loud and intrusive. I unpacked my camera, crouched to capture the carvings before time erased them altogether. It felt like honest work, preserving a piece of history no one else cared to touch. It wasn't until my third row of headstones that I heard it. Crunch, the sound of leaves giving under weight. At first, I thought it was just my own movement echoing strangely between the hills. But when I paused, the sound didn't. Another step, measured, deliberate, just behind me. I turned, quick. Nothing. Only crooked stones and the long shadows of bare trees, stretching farther than they should have in the failing light. I went back to work, telling myself I was on edge from being alone. My camera clicked, shutter echoing sharp in the cold air. Then again, crunch. This time closer, my neck prickled hot. I spun around so fast the camera strap slapped my chest. No one. The ground behind me was soft with mud from last night's rain. Yet no footprints but my own trailed through it. I remember crouching low, brushing my hand across the damp earth, certain I'd find an impression, but there was nothing, clean, untouched. I stayed low, listening. That was the worst part. It wasn't random, wasn't the scurry of an animal. Whoever it was, they waited until I moved. Every time I lifted the camera, a new step followed. Slow, careful, always keeping pace with me, just beyond sight. At one tilted stone, my fingers trembled so much the photo blurred. I steadied myself, leaned close, and read the inscription. Martha Jane, beloved daughter, 1859, 1864, a child. My throat tightened. I raised the camera again, and just then, I swear, I felt it. A pressure against my back. Not a shove, not a touch, but the heavy awareness of something leaning close enough to breathe against my neck. My skin prickled cold, though no air moved. I snapped the picture anyway and nearly dropped the camera. That broke me. I bolted, half tripping over brambles, slamming the camera back into its case. The crunching grew faster as I ran, keeping pace behind me but never passing. I didn't dare look back until I'd shoved the gate shut and stumbled onto the gravel path beyond. The sound stopped. Just like that, the woods around me fell back into silence, the kind so deep it feels like it's pressing into your ears. I didn't go straight home. I sat in my truck on the roadside, chest heaving, fingers shaking too much to even turn the key. The sun was gone by then, and with the headlights off, the trees around me were nothing but black silhouettes. I forced myself to calm down, telling myself I'd imagined it. Stress, isolation, nothing more. When I finally made it back, I couldn't bring myself to unload the gear. The camera sat in its case on the passenger seat until the next morning. When I finally powered it on and scrolled through the shots, my stomach dropped. On the first few frames, nothing unusual, just weathered stones and the carved names of the dead. But as I moved through them, I began to see shapes, not clear, not like someone standing there, more like outlines, blurred impressions. On one photo, behind a tall marker, something crouched low, knees bent wrong, head cocked. The next, something pale between two leaning slabs, as if peering out. The last photo, the one I'd taken of Martha Jane's grave, made my throat tighten so badly I nearly dropped the camera. Behind the small headstone, the air itself seemed darker, warped, and out of that darkness leaned a faint figure. Too faint to describe cleanly, but I could see its intent. It was bent low, as though pressing against my back, watching what I was doing, waiting. I deleted the photos that same night. I couldn't keep them, but it didn't matter. Sometimes when I'm lying in bed, drifting towards sleep, I hear it again. That slow, deliberate crunch of leaves just behind me, just out of reach, and I can't shake the thought that maybe it followed me out of there. That once you acknowledge something that wants to stay forgotten, it doesn't let you go. I haven't been back to that cemetery, and I won't, but every time the autumn air turns cold, I think of the fallen stones, of Martha Jane, of the shadows that didn't belong, and I wonder how many others have walked those grounds, feeling the same weight at their back, hearing the same footsteps on undisturbed earth, because some names, it seems, aren't meant to be remembered, and some things don't want you to leave once you've seen them. Story 8. The Hollow Beneath the Graves. I don't go to that graveyard anymore, not after what I saw. It sits on the far edge of town, halfway swallowed by the tree line, where the mountain pushes in so close it feels like the stones are being pressed down into the dirt. Nobody really tends it anymore, not since the church closed back in the 70s. Folks in town call it the Forgotten Yard, like it's not really a graveyard at all, just a patch of old earth holding what people didn't want to think about. I went up there one evening late last October. It wasn't for any reason in particular. The air had that sharpness it gets before frost, and the sun was laying itself out thin between the ridges, bleeding red through the trees. I was restless, the kind of restless where you can't sit still but you don't want company either. So I walked. The graveyard's iron gate leaned open, one hinge broken, the chains rusted through. The grass was waist-high in some places, seeded with black walnuts and dry weeds. There's a smell in places like that. Damp stone, mouldy earth, the faintest sourness, like rainwater gone stale. I picked my way through leaning markers. Most of them so weathered the names were gone. Just stones, blank and unspoken. I remember thinking it felt less like a graveyard and more like the woods had been trying for years to erase the memory of it. That's when I found it. The hollow. It wasn't a grave, not really. More like the ground had sunk down between a row of tilting stones, a shallow depression shaped almost like a bowl. At first I thought maybe it was an old animal den, but when I crouched near the edge, I could see where the earth had sheared downward, roots twisting through the dirt like knotted fingers. They gripped something darker below, not wood, not stone, just blackness. I leaned closer. The air was colder there, heavy like the inside of a cellar. And then the ground shifted. It wasn't much, just a tremble under my palms, but enough to make me lurch backward. Dirt spilled inward, and for one quick second I swear the hollow deepened, pulling breath like a lung. I left then, faster than I want to admit, my heart banging like a hammer in my throat. I told myself it was just settling earth, a burrow collapsing. But all the way down the path I had the strange feeling that something had noticed me, that by looking in I'd been seen. That night I dreamed. The dream was the graveyard, only wrong. The sky had no stars, no moon, just a red haze that sat heavy as smoke. The graves weren't still, they were moving, pushing upward as if the ground couldn't hold them anymore. I saw earth split down the middle, stone markers swallowed whole, and from the hollow came a sound like whispers said through teeth. My name, over and over, carried on the breath of soil. I woke with dirt under my nails. I don't remember clawing the sheets, but there it was. Dark crescents packed tight. I should have left it alone. Most people would have. But when the sun came up, I felt pulled back, like a string tied to my ribs. By daylight, the yard looked ordinary again. Silent, still, just broken markers under a grey sky. When I reached the row where the hollow had been, I stopped dead. It was gone. The ground had smoothed over, grass and all, as if it had never been disturbed. I stood there too long, waiting for something, half expecting the earth to open beneath me. Nothing did. But the feeling stayed, the sense that something was still down there, under the soles of my boots, awake now and listening. I tried to shake it. I went home, worked, told myself it was nothing. But nights didn't feel the same after that. The wind sounded different in the trees, carrying little catches of voice that stopped when I did. Sometimes standing at my sink, I'd swear the ground gave the faintest sigh, like someone exhaling beneath the house. It's worse when I sleep. The graveyard keeps coming back in dreams, though now the hollow is bigger. Each time, I see more of what's underneath. I'll wake in the dark with the taste of dirt in my mouth, my tongue gritty like I've been chewing soil. I don't tell people this part, but I'll tell you. A week after it started, I went out back one morning and found a patch of earth that had sunken near the edge of my yard. Small, shallow, but shaped the same way. My dog wouldn't go near it. He just stood on the porch, hackles up, whining low. It's spread since then. Little dips in the ground along the tree line, in the field across the road. They don't stay long, sometimes gone by morning, grass unbroken as if nothing had changed. But I know better. I know what they are. I don't go walking much now. I don't sleep easy either. Every time the wind dies, when the woods hold still and quiet, I hear it, faint but steady, like something shifting in the soil, patient, waiting. Sometimes I wonder if I brought it back with me, or if it was always there, waiting to be noticed. Either way, I can feel it pressing close now, closer every night. The ground remembers me, and it wants me to come back. Story 9, Whispering Stones in the Corners. I don't usually take walks that late at night anymore. Back then, it was something I did without much thought, just to clear my head, stretch my legs, keep the silence from pressing too hard inside the cabin. I'd been living alone in those hills for close to a year, tucked up against a stretch of woods that always seemed darker than it should have been, even under a full moon. My closest neighbor was about 3 miles down the road, and I'd grown used to the kind of isolation where the sound of your own boots in the dirt can feel too loud. There's a graveyard about a half-mile from where I was staying. Old place. Stones leaned like crooked teeth. Names worn smooth by rain and wind, some so faint you had to crouch down with a lantern to trace the letters with your fingers. I'd passed by it plenty of times during the day, never giving it much thought. But that night, I don't know why, I let my feet carry me in. Maybe it was the way the air had gone still, or how the moonlight seemed to push at the edges of the forest instead of spilling through it. Maybe it was just loneliness. The gate wasn't much of a gate at all, just 2 rotting posts and a sagging line of rusted wire. I stepped over it and followed the narrow path between the graves. The grass was damp and high, the kind that soaks your pants up to the knee and leaves you chilled. My lantern swung at my side, throwing light that made every shadow jump. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was the wind catching in the trees, except the night was dead still. It was faint, almost like the sound of someone breathing out words too soft to catch. A murmur, low and steady, curling around the stones. I froze, head tilted, trying to place it. It wasn't coming from one direction. It seemed to slip from the corners of the graveyard, wherever the stones leaned hardest, wherever the darkness pooled deepest. I held my breath and listened. The voices didn't sound like speech exactly, more like fragments, pieces of sentences that slid under each other, urgent, pressing. I couldn't make out a single word, but I knew I was supposed to. The longer I stood there, the heavier the silence grew around the whispers pressing into my ears like water. I told myself to turn back, walk home, close the door, forget it. But curiosity has a way of pulling at you stronger than fear sometimes. I stepped closer to one of the stones that leaned sharpest, its top nearly brushing the ground. The whispering dipped low, dropped into silence. The quiet that followed wasn't right. It wasn't the kind of silence you get on a windless night. It felt forced, like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to move. My lantern flickered, and for a second, I swore the stone shifted. Not a crumble or a settling, but a movement, just a few inches, like it had been caught easing forward when I wasn't looking. I stumbled back, the grass slick beneath my boots. My pulse was climbing high in my throat, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from that stone. I told myself it was the shadows, the angle of my light, the tricks of tired eyes, but in my gut, I knew I'd seen it. I turned to leave, and that's when it happened again. Another stone, across the path this time. I glanced at it, and for the smallest flicker of a moment, it wasn't where it had been. It leaned harder, as though it were straining toward me. The whispers rose again, louder now, still impossible to understand, but sharp with urgency. Like a warning or a plea. I didn't stay long enough to decide which. My feet carried me fast through the wet grass, lanterns swinging wild, shadows stretching long and wrong at the corners of my sight. The voices followed, dipping and rising, then cutting off all at once the moment I cleared the broken gate. The road back to the cabin never felt so long. Every step I half expected to hear the crunch of stone shifting behind me, or to see one of those leaning markers dragging itself across the dirt. But the night stayed still, and the whispers never left the graveyard. When I finally shut the cabin door behind me, my chest heaving, I thought that would be the end of it. Just a strange night, the kind you remember later with a nervous laugh. But sleep never came easy again. Even now, years later, I can't pass a graveyard without feeling that same pressure in my ears, that same tug in my gut. I keep thinking about those whispers, how close I was to hearing what they were saying. Part of me wonders if I should have stayed just a little longer, leaned in until the words made sense. But another part of me, the part that wakes up sweating in the dark, knows better. Because whatever conversation was happening among those stones, it wasn't meant for me. I wasn't supposed to hear it. And sometimes, when the night is still enough, I swear I catch the echo of it. Low, urgent, unfinished, waiting for me to come back and listen. But I never will. And yet, I know one day I'll have to pass that graveyard again. And when I do, I don't think those stones will stay leaning where I left them. I wasn't supposed to wander that far in the graveyard, but something drew me past the neat rows of recent graves. The sun was low, bleeding orange across the ridges, and the wind had that dry autumn bite. I followed a narrow trail through high weeds, pressed flat like something had been through it before. The deeper I went, the heavier the air became, still, almost suffocating. The stones appeared gradually at first. One leaned crooked, moss swallowing its edges. Another lay face down, half buried in dirt. The weeds clawed at my legs as I pressed forward. Nothing about this section felt right. It wasn't on the map. No caretaker would have come here for decades, and yet I felt compelled to keep going, as though something unseen wanted me there. Then I heard it, soft scratching, deliberate. I froze. My mind tried to rationalize it. A squirrel, the wind, some animal under a stone. But the sound came from the ground itself, rising slow, methodical, fingernails dragging through soil, scraping wood, something breaking through. My heart hammered. I bent closer to the nearest stone, terrified and mesmerized. The scratching stopped the moment I stepped back, silence so thick it pressed into my ears, and then the stone moved, slowly, leaning toward me as if pushed by hands beneath it, inch by inch. The dirt shifted around it. I didn't wait to see more. I ran. The weeds tore at my clothes, roots snagged my shoes, but I didn't care. The shadows of the dying day stretched long behind me, fingers of darkness trying to clutch at my heels. I didn't stop until I broke through the iron fence and hit the main path again. My chest heaved, lungs burning, sweat icy against my skin. I never looked back. That night, in bed, I told myself it had been imagination. Stones tip, animals scratch, old ground shifts. But the dreams wouldn't let me forget. Hands clawing up through soil, faces crushed beneath stone, silent mouths opening and closing. I woke with dirt under my fingernails I didn't remember touching. Weeks passed. I tried to ignore it, but the memory followed me. Driving past the cemetery, my eyes flinched toward that back hill. I asked the caretaker once if anyone had been buried past the fence. He said no, just soft ground, nothing ever put there. But his hands shook and he wouldn't meet my eyes. Now, even at home, the feeling lingers. Unseen eyes on me, a weight pressing through floors and walls. At night, I hear scratches in the silence, and I know, if I ever return to that forgotten plot, I won't come back. Story 10, The Forgotten Plot at Dusk. I wasn't supposed to be in that part of the graveyard. Truth be told, I hadn't even known it existed. I'd gone walking that evening just to clear my head. The sun was already leaning heavy against the mountains, bleeding orange across the ridges, and the wind carried that sharp, dry smell that only comes in autumn. The newer graves were neat, polished, with plastic flowers sun-bleached and brittle. But somewhere past the last iron fence post, where the land dipped down toward the tree line, I found myself staring at something else entirely. The path I followed wasn't a path at all, just beaten grass, pressed down as though deer or wild dogs had cut their own trail through. But it tugged me deeper into a section no caretaker had touched in decades. The air itself seemed different there, still, stale, heavy, as if no breeze dared wander past the rusted gates. The first stone I saw was leaning like a broken tooth. The name had been eaten away by moss, edges sharp with cracks. Another one lay face down in the dirt, half buried, like the earth had been trying to swallow it whole. Soon they came one after another, crooked stones, jagged, toppled, some little more than unshaped slabs. The weeds grew waist high, thorny brambles twisting around names that no one alive could read anymore. It wasn't on the cemetery's posted map. I'd looked at that board a dozen times. My grandparents were buried here, up on the proper hill, in a well-tended row. But this wasn't meant to be here. I knew it in my bones. I should have turned back. But something about the place held me. The way the stones seemed arranged wrong, too close together, like bodies stacked too near in the dirt. The way silence thickened the air, pressing on my ears until even my own breath sounded strange. I heard it first like a whisper, scratching, too faint to pin down. Could have been a squirrel clawing at bark, or the hiss of bramble against stone, but the longer I stood, the clearer it grew. Deliberate, methodical, nails dragging slow across something hard, coming not from around me, but beneath. I froze. My hands went cold. Every instinct screamed to move, but my legs were stone. I bent my head, straining. The sound rose, steady as a heartbeat, from under the ground itself. From beneath one of the crooked stones at my feet, the image clawed its way unbidden into my mind. A coffin lid, splintered by frantic hands, fingernails tearing through wood and dirt. Someone, something, still trying to claw their way free. I stepped back so fast I nearly tripped on a root, and the sound stopped. Just like that, cut clean. The silence after was worse, heavy, accusing. Then the stone nearest me shifted, slowly, impossibly. It leaned toward me, just enough to catch the fading light. Like some unseen hand beneath was pushing it up, inch by inch. I don't remember choosing to run, but I did. My feet tore through the weeds, slapping against uneven ground. The thorns raked my legs, but I didn't feel them until later. The sky dimmed fast, dusk falling harder with every step, and the shadows stretched long, reaching for me. I cleared the rusted fence without even noticing how, whether I climbed or whether the ground simply gave way under me. All I remember is stumbling onto the main path again, heart thundering, sweat running cold down my back. When I finally stopped, I was already halfway to the parking lot. My lungs burned, but the silence back there pressed harder than my own chest did. I wanted to turn, just once, to see if the crooked stones were still leaning, if something had followed, but I couldn't. My whole body refused. I never looked back. That night, lying awake in my bed, I told myself I'd imagined it. Old ground shifts, stones tip over, animals scratch, sounds twist in the mind when the light goes strange at dusk. I almost believed myself until the dream started. I saw hands, pale, dirt-caked, breaking through the soil. I saw faces half crushed under stone, mouths opening but no sound spilling out. I woke gasping, throat raw, fingernails full of grit I couldn't explain. Weeks passed and the cemetery called to me. I'd drive by and feel my eyes flicker toward that back hill, to the dip in the land I swore I'd never walk again. I fought the urge, but it wore me down. I asked the caretaker once, casually, if there'd ever been burials beyond the fence. His face shifted, just slightly, just enough. He said no, said the ground was too soft down there, nothing was ever put in, but his hands trembled when he said it, and he didn't meet my eyes. That was the last time I spoke of it aloud. Now, even in the safety of my own home, I feel them. That sensation, that prickling weight of unseen eyes. It follows me from room to room. I'll catch myself glancing toward the floor, half expecting to hear that deliberate scratching rise through the boards. Some nights, when the house goes quiet, I swear I do. And I know, God help me, I know, if I ever step foot in that forgotten plot again, I won't come back out. I wandered farther than I ever should have in the graveyard, past the neat rows where freshly carved stones gleamed in the dying light. The path narrowed, overgrown with weeds that tugged at my boots, and the air grew heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. The sun had dipped low behind the ridges, spilling orange and grey across the horizon, and the shadows between the trees stretched like long fingers, reaching across the cracked headstones. It was the kind of quiet that pressed into your chest and made your ears ring, and I felt that something was watching, even before I saw anything unusual. This part of the cemetery wasn't on any map. The stones were old, many unreadable, leaning at odd angles, as though time itself had grown tired of holding them upright. Some were swallowed almost entirely by weeds and vines, others cracked and weathered beyond recognition. Each step I took through that forgotten section made the hairs on my neck prickle. It was quiet except for the wind, but beneath it I thought I heard a soft scratching. At first I tried to convince myself it was an animal, maybe a raccoon under the leaves, but the sound was deliberate, patient, fingernails dragging through soil, slow and careful. I froze, my heart hammered in my ears. The sound seemed to rise from the ground itself, crawling beneath the roots and rocks, as if something was trying to push upward, clawing toward the surface. I bent closer to a cracked stone, curiosity and dread mixing, but the instant I took a step back, the scratching stopped. Silence fell, heavier than any silence I'd ever known, and in that stillness, I saw it, a single stone, tipping toward me, not rolling, not falling, but leaning slowly, inch by inch, as though something unseen was pushing it. My stomach twisted and I bolted. The weeds tore at my legs, branches snagged my coat. But I didn't slow. The last light of day sank behind the ridge as I scrambled over the fence back to the main path. My lungs burned, chest heaving, hands trembling. I never looked back, though I could feel those eyes on me, still watching, still waiting, through the darkness that swallowed the forgotten plot. At home that night, I tried to tell myself it had been imagination. Stones do shift, soil settles, small animals scratch. But the dreams came anyway, scratches in the silence, cold hands under dirt, cracked stones leaning over me. Dirt appeared on my sheets I hadn't touched. And sometimes, late at night, I hear it again. The soft, deliberate scratching, calling me back. I asked the caretaker once if anyone had been buried in that far-off section. He stared at me, hands shaking, and said, no. Just soft ground, empty earth, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. Even now, weeks later, I can't shake it. Every time I pass a cemetery, every time I walk through the woods at dusk, I feel them, the unseen eyes, the waiting, the unfinished story beneath the stones. And I know, If I ever return to that forgotten plot, I will not come back.